and pick out what I want.
Well, that took forever. I'm really sorry about that, everyone. So what I miss?
What I was, I'm going to repeat myself. Sorry, folks. I thought that one of the other sort of ideas that we might frame this discussion with is by saying what it is that we would like to do but cannot do. That sometimes that unlocks conversational flow of this kind. And I was pointing out that here's an example of one of them that I have. I would love to have an artificial intelligence piece that would a tool that would go through any long document that where the author just writes on and on and on without putting any subheads in, so that I can't scan through it and find the parts that I really want to read by quickly scanning through it. That's something I can't do now, and I would like to be able to do it.
I think that is a good framing. Shall we work on that for a bit? What wishes are there? I wrote yours here.
What frustrates you? What can't you? What do you want to do now that you can't do?
I would
write while walking around.
But actually,
Right.
To help this poor guy sitting in Estonia, can you type, if there's something specific, if you type it in, I will put it straight down. Of course, if you speak it, I'll note it down. But what did you say? Walking?
Yeah, I can't do writing while walking around.
Yes, you can. Siri. I
No.
sent the longest text message today. You can't do edit writing, but you can do basic writing. And as Mark pointed out, with the deficiencies of author this week, there's a huge difference between just writing it in, which you really can't do with Siri in many cases,
sure.
but you certainly can't write there then.
Yeah.
Peter.
I'd like to be able to construct hyperlink structures verbally.
Mm-hmm.
Can you verbally explain a bit more what you mean, or give an example?
Let's see. Say I'm walking into a corridor in Grand Central Terminal and I run into someone. So I'd like to be able to say that I met their name, Grand Central Station, now, and then have that actually build a hyperlink structure that I can query later on. And I'd like to also be able to query it, like, what year did Freud graduate? And it would just be matching on the sentence fragments with a couple of keywords to do it. So it doesn't have to be understanding the structure so much, more as what followed by some arbitrary verbal identifier. Then the next verb would be considered to be the attribute that I'm talking about, and it would go and automatically retrieve the value. And if I said, remember something, then it would store that triple for me automatically. And again, I don't even care whether it's correctly transcribing it or turning it into English. Just have that little audio snippet and match as closely as possible on the audio snippet to retrieve stuff, without having to type anything or having to spell out the spelling of the name, just while walking, and be able to pull things up and retrieve them that way. Now, a number of years back, I stumbled onto some research of someone who was doing near matches on audio, and the professor had that aspect of it working. I wrote to him, and it was very frustrating. I got a letter back that said, "Are you a recording label?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, well, I have this wonderful technology. I want to sell it to a recording label. So are you willing to drop N millions of dollars on me as a recording label to purchase my tech? Otherwise, I don't want to know you, and I don't want to have anything ever happen to my tech. My model is I'm going to sell my tech to a recording label, and anyone who's not a recording label drop dead.
copying from Zoom into here is difficult. Very often it just doesn't take. How about that for a nonsense thing? That's a good example, Peter. And I'm wondering why we don't have that kind of integration yet, because as you know, in Author, you can just write any definition you want. And if it's a grammatical sentence, you have your triples. It should be trivial to build something that can add to your knowledge graph to find concepts, whatever the terminology might be, those types of sentences, and then be able to extract that.
Actually, on the subject of outlines, and you know, imposing and extracting outlines, one of the things that I think is very broken in the current model is it's very easy to go down in an outline. It's very difficult to come back to the context of the level above. Most people seem to get around the, or expect you to get around the problem by starting a new heading at a different level. So if you're 3 levels down, you can't continue, you can't basically nest something and say a level 2 object and then go back to the same object. You have to start another level 1 object, which I think is bonkers, but there you go. I mean, I think that's a sort of, it's a failure in the way the tools are made rather than the notion of outlines per se.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just wanted to show this regarding Bob's point about subheads. So what we've built now into Author, I think we may have discussed it, is the ability for the writer to highlight the bits that really say what the different paragraphs are about. This is to help editing long documents. So if I now fold it, it only shows that, right? So this was the email I sent to Vint saying, Vint, I need at least $500,000 a year. What are we going to do? And I sent him also a screenshot of this page as well as the text. If he doesn't have time to read it, he should be able to just follow that. This should be in the visual meta as an alternative reading mode. It isn't yet. But the notion of a subhead or a subheading is really, really important, Bob. And I think even within that, we need to consider the language of what it is.
Yep.
Is it when you fold the document to see subheads, do you also want to see bullet points? Do you want to see bold text? Do you want to see annotations? Do you want to see comments? Do you want to see endnotes? Do you want to see footnotes? Do you want to see references? All of this should be available to us, right?
Yes. Yes. Excellent. Good ideas. All of them.
Okay, thanks for that nice comment. And I see 2 hands, but just really briefly, the thing that I've noticed very much, which is very analogous to the sculptor's tools, is that with sculptor's tools, yes, there are many different shapes and whatnot, but they're basically the same kind of things in your hand. And Ega, Mama is in there. I'm in a meeting, darling. Please don't shout. Sorry, everyone. Family room holiday. Is anybody can make the most incredible single-use piece of software, really, with enough money. That's not a problem. The problem is to build it into your brain and hands and workflow, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to the question of when you fold, what do you see? It's a really difficult problem because you will want to have something that just fits your general sense of an overview. And then you want to have more specific ones, right? And in Author, we have played with this and we've done things like see only this, that, and the other. But come on, apart from me, who's going to bother learning these different keyboard shortcuts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we can look at together the different levels of folding, that would be really useful. Hang on, there's a. So this deals with it slightly differently. This is my Viva. Excuse me. This is my thesis after my Viva, and I've done this just to help me, because now you can see this is what matters here, but it's not always the first sentence, so we can't do it automatically. Reflecting on your AI points, Bob, and also in an official document like this, there's all this stuff that's fluff in the beginning, declaration of authorship. You don't want to see that when you zoom out, right?
Right.
That's why a lot of it has nothing. And then stuff that doesn't really matter for me, but it has to be in there, is there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Anyway,
I mean, just quickly before it gets lost, because thinking to Bob's point, I mean, I don't know if Scholarcy is arguably to an extent doing this abstraction of the type that is being mentioned.
What is it called? What is it called?
Scholarcy, and Freud knows the guy who makes it. It's working with academic papers, I think, mainly at the moment. But basically, he's using machine learning to do a degree of effectively pulling out, as it were, what appear to be the salient points. That's always, it's always open to interpretation, but can certainly perhaps get you a long way. And so very quickly, because I see there are other hands up. I'm also thinking one of the things that I know Dave Millard, who's here occasionally, does in his papers, for instance, when he's working in LaTeX, is he'll rather than actually do the sort of sense the highlighting that Freud's doing, he'll actually put a comment. So the abstract will be a series of sentences interspersed with a comment that you'll never see in the final thing, but which in a sense is just saying what the thing's doing. Because I'm trying to think through the loop the other way. So this idea that Freud just showed of basically highlighting things within the document, you want to then be able to effectively collapse as a more condensed form of key salient points for other people is interesting and begs the question how you aid yourself to write with that in mind. So one way is maybe, you oddly for an authoring document as opposed to a coding tool, perhaps you actually want comments. And we should always remove, but just something to say, look, here I want to cover this. And when you've covered it and maybe I then mark the most salient part of that thing, you can move on. But otherwise, it's just a blank canvas staring at you.
Yeah,
Well, that sort of plays into the sense in which when you write a document, all you're writing typically is the document or possibly one fixed level of annotation. And something that what I was thinking more about, you saying, yeah, you can write when you're walking, but you can't edit. The lack of the sort of accompanying information of the audio clips can mean that enough context can be garbled and lost that the writing expedition can be more or less garbage without proper attention to the context. And so we can't write at different levels. We can't attach information at sort of different levels of relevance in a way that lets us see that some things are commentary, some things might be meta commentary, that some things are sort of relationships, but they all have to go into the same kind of big bucket of characters on a document for the most part. Being able to keep them together but keep them apart is a very difficult nut to crack.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point. Fabian, even though you're second because Peter's already spoken, sorry. Peter, you don't mind waiting, do you?
Not at all.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if we can also get inspired with videos in the sense that there are now video players that show where people, what's the most famous or popular at least part of a video. And we have, let's say on player, or not players, but you have like either in frontier or for nature, you have an embedded text reader. So we could basically see where people spend most time, where people scroll, where people highlight. So you have, assuming you have a sufficient amount of readers reading a document, or that readers have a certain, let's say, type, people who come, let's say, for computer science and reading a document or a paper about biology might not spend the same time as people who are from the field. So I think that could also be a way to do it, because this way, yeah, you can see what people spend time on. That's one way to get data on what potentially could be interesting, and thus summarize or have at least a easier way to dive and then eventually expand if you're really interested by whatever is there.
I think I wrote that down correctly. Peter.
Okay, couple thoughts. One, I wouldn't mind something that could be contextually sensitive as to what I'm doing and then consciously jog my memory. Has anyone tried using Anki flashcards? Came across my radar a while back and I never spent any time with it, but I was wondering if any of you tried it and whether it was of any use to you. Also, I found another link. This is the MIT AI Lab memo on the Programmer's Apprentice project, which was intended to help programmers in their work by monitoring what they were doing and making suggestions. And I wonder if that could sort of be generalized to a scholar's apprentice.
I was so excited by your flashcards. I didn't hear the last bit. Can you please repeat?
The last one is a link to an overview of the Programmer's Apprentice project from the MIT AI Lab way back. And it was intended to have a software system observe what you were doing, infer from that what your intent might be, and then make constructive suggestions based thereon, including offering to fill in templates for standard patterns that it recognized in what you were doing. And I wonder if that could sort of be generalized to have some sort of a scholar's apprentice to jog your memory and help you organize things. One thing that I have as a method, I have a folder that just is labeled in my documents folder, PDFs. And I have, tens of hundreds of PDF files in there. And I don't have the time to go through and just sort of manually structure that. And I'd love to have something that would help organize that for me. Also, I might want to see dissolving the distinction between originals and aliases and file systems so that I could have something in more than one place and also from any place be able to see all the other places that it was located at.
Between aliases and what did you call the original?
Aliases and originals. To sort of
You
dissolve
did
that
use original.
distinction there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fabian.
Yeah, so I used it, not Anki, but the same principle basically of space repetition. I gave up. So I think it means that, yeah, I didn't find that efficient enough, or maybe it felt like too much noise, or if I don't know in which context. Let's say it's best, like if you go from one field to another, you might not want, if you know that you have notes about the topic that maybe you don't care because you know you'll have a way to go back to it. Yeah, it definitely works, but the question is more, is it worth it? Like, do you want to spend time on this, like to keep it fresh in memory, or because you know you'll be able to go back whenever you want, then that's another way to do it. So yeah, I tried. I made my own little system with like a RSS feed because that was the tool used. Could be any kind of notification. It's pretty straightforward to set up, but I think that the kind of context when you're not, let's say, a medicine student with a test next week, I'm not convinced to be, well, like I said, I tried and I gave up.
I think part of the problem with the flashcards when I tried to tinker around with it wasn't actually so much the learning as much as creating the flashcards. Had someone made a set of really good flashcards on a subject I was really interested in, I'd been having a whole different experience with the mechanism. So one of the challenges is that unless somebody is, someone beavering away completely elsewhere is going to be producing this. One of the things that comes out, so say following on from Bob's question about, isn't there something that can do this structural extraction for me or identifying salient points? How might that be taken a stage further? So having extracted the salient points, how do I put those into a form usable for spaced repetition learning? Which is another way of saying how could it chunk that into a format that a flashcard system can use? I think that's actually quite more complex than it sounds, because, for instance, the salient points that you might pull out of a long form document might not necessarily be the same set of points as you might want to put in as the sort of key subjects in a flashcard system. But again, I'm not particularly expert with those systems, so I don't want to give too much weight to my view there.
This is where the million diagram project would help, because I would put one diagram per flashcard on there. We would, the first step of it would be to collect diagrams as they actually exist in scientific papers now in some subject matter, not every subject matter doing everything, but just one. Get started on it, find out what the problems are, and then do some more work than I have done, although I've done some on how to make good diagrams out of kind of crappy diagrams or insufficient. I'll put it, not, I tend to have that kind of Midwestern language, insufficient diagrams, let's put it that way, that are generally not what I like to think of as standalone diagrams, which is a concept I've been working on. How to put on one page the diagram and enough chunks of text, and I emphasize chunks, not long flowing stuff, chunks of text on the same page that allows the diagram to more or less, and I repeat, more or less stand alone. That's what the first phase of a million diagram project would attempt to do. And
Yeah,
that would, and of course, I repeat in the sense of the paper that I wrote, it would be hyperlinked, so that you have a hyperlinked subject matter, all diagrammed.
Yeah, I mean, the language is interesting because the question is, are we talking about flashcards for a subject you don't know, or are you talking about a set of flashcards for your own knowledge? I think
for everybody,
I'm
talking about for everybody's knowledge, or as many people as want to join in.
Yeah, but the interesting questions then also is it for stuff you know or stuff you don't know? Because if it's for stuff you know, then you're the ones creating them, which creates an interesting workflow there, because you get the benefit of writing and then the benefit of then later, like we have, imagine it, instead of saying the definition of perspectives, all you see is the word perspectives. And if you just look at it and think, do I know that? It's like, oh, okay, yeah, blah, or not. But if you do for knowledge to share with everyone, I guess we're looking at some kind of federation of how things would be added to it, right?
Yes, and tools. I mean, I sent you, I believe, a paper by someone at the University of Washington called Akamatsu, who is putting together this summer, a kind of argumentation mapping project, which will consist of claims that some whoever the biologists are that are working together, claims that they're hypothesizing, and whatever links to supports or disputes that the claim has, but it's within a subject matter and they're doing it together. That is, they're building it so that a community, like the community of several thousand, maybe 100,000 scientists who worked on COVID, started to do a couple of years ago, when they started just throwing all their papers onto a server, so anybody could read them pre-publication. Well, here Akamatsu and his colleagues are trying to enable you to do this in smaller chunks. That is, to make claims, which may not be understandable to you or me, because we don't have the prerequisite in knowledge, but would be relevant to the people who are involved in this collaborative claims project, so they can track what other people are doing.
Can you write his name in the chat so I can put it in our document, please?
I'm sort of, in principle, don't use chat, but I will try to do that. Yes,
Okay, thank you.
because I find that chat distracts me from doing other things, like paying attention to you.
Okay. Okay, so
Let's see. I'm looking for chat here.
okay, so this brings back what I
Yeah.
think is a very important point from previous discussion, and that is argument mapping, the whole logos versus mythos thing. And I think argument mapping is very, very important and useful if everybody agrees on the problem statement. You know, so in science it makes sense, but if you're talking about the war in a country, climate change, gun rights, abortion, all these issues, you're not going to be able to argue it. That's just not how it works, obviously. So within what we're talking about now with connections of knowledge, can we find the means through which we can actually help people see things from different perspectives, more on the mythos side of it?
Freda, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Jim Strayhorn here. Let
Hi,
me
Jim.
show something in front of the camera. Can you see what I'm rotating in my hand?
No, because I was just typing Mark's comment, but I'm going to change my view. Hang on, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you better. And go to speaker view. Oh, that's very beautiful.
Well, what this is a 4-inch cube, clear plastic. And what I have inside it are some lucite pyramids, truncated pyramids that I had created by a local shop. And it evolved out of some thinking I had done that in the center of these 6 truncated pyramids was a circle representing a problem. I'm sorry, a sphere representing a problem. And I began thinking about the problems represented as a sphere initially, but I then envisioned that sphere inside a cube to get to your question earlier, where you basically said, should we talk about where we stand or how to position ourselves to see an area of knowledge? And this was done in a political context so that on the right side, I was thinking this is the conservative view. On the left side is the liberal point of view. On the top side might be a libertarian point of view, or I would perhaps say an authoritarian point of view. And on the back side, though it's not talked about politically, I was thinking this was the pro-corporation point of view. And on the opposite 6th side or 5th side was what I was calling a pro-citizen point of view, which was the opposite of a corporate point of view. I'm simply saying that with the internal sphere being a graphic representation of a subject, which could have a whole bunch of spheres inside it, representing the sub-subjects, the cube around the sphere is a way to envision a point of view context that I find very helpful, though I haven't been able to represent it digitally yet. What I need to do is create a digital version of this so others can use it. This turns out to be simply a plastic cube that's commercially available because it houses a baseball. There are various size things. There are some for basketballs, et cetera, and I've been collecting them as a way of thinking about something in greater detail. This also relates to something I think Bob said, and which he and I have talked about, which is the key word which hasn't come up in talking about bolded text or highlighted text. It seems to me that the problem is a lack of prioritization of ideas or levels. And I personally think that that's a problem with publishing norms. My pet peeve is reading a book of 300 pages, which is 150,000 words, let's say, all the same size. So I've started to kind of use type size as a way of trying to communicate what I think is important as I write. I'm only at the beginning of that, but I find I'm a slow reader, so I find 150,000 page books very difficult to internalize. But I'd like to make, as a listener, I'm very impressed by the level and kinds of things you as a group are talking about. So let me say thank you.
That was a lot. So I think what you're talking about with that shape is exactly on point with what I'm thinking about deeply. I think
Good.
it's a beautiful visualization. Now, there's also the big 5 personality types, which is kind of interesting to try to map, where people might be on different spectrum. I am still looking for where in our brains character and personality is stored. Still haven't found it. I think that at some point, some of it is, openness and conscientiousness seem to have physical representations in the brain because some areas are bigger and I can't remember their names, but they are obviously problematic, like conscientiousness. For some people, it means, paying your taxes on time. For other people, it means going on the right demonstration. And in a sense, those are left and right wing values if you want to stereotype for the sake of argument. So to map them on can be very, very tricky. However, if we can use even machine learning to allow someone to take a paragraph, a sentence, or an entire document and instantly have 6 ways of reading it, holy moly, right? Because when you talk about the corporation point of view, that's fascism. If you want to use the bad word, but if you want to use the good word, it's capitalism, right? It doesn't matter, but they are valuable things. My father was a capitalist. He was a wonderful, humane man. He never fired anyone in his life, even though he had over 5,000 people working for him. But he didn't, he thought a lot of what we and me thought was important was a bit wishy-washy. Fair enough, right? But when you have access to a few people in your life, you can have that kind of dialogue. If you don't, it's difficult. So does anyone in the group have notions of how we can have an intelligent AI-based discussion with someone of a very different point of view? I mean, before, throwing it out there, like currently in America, there's all abortion stuff, which is actually intellectually as well as morally and emotionally fascinating because nobody wants to kill a baby. But how do you get to the position of what do you mean by a baby? Right, that is partly factual. I saw that someone had a beautiful thing on social media the other day. It's like, okay, for this discussion, take a zygote, like the earliest possible impregnated thing in a petri dish, and hold it up and hold the baby in the other hand, and tell someone who is completely against abortion in any sense which one to drop. Nobody's going to drop the living baby, so clearly there's a difference. That's an emotional way of coming at it. Are there machine ways that can help us with this that aren't just for pre-existing things? Or should we, like Bob's beautiful murals, shall we try to make a system for 6-sided murals?
Yes, that's what I suggest, that we need rooms with murals on all 4 walls and maybe on the ceiling, and the ability to to change them with a click.
Yeah, but so if we talk about
and we also need facilitation of the teams that are in the room that are equally sophisticated in bringing the people into the room for what purpose, and excluding all the other purposes that might be around, so that one can make slight amounts of progress. Because we can, it's difficult to make slight amounts of progress when anybody can say anything in a group, which means changing the whole topic all the time before someone else has a chance to dig deeper or follow deeper into it. So there's a very important a bunch of skills that that exist and are taught, but very few people learn them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to throw the mic to Fabian and Brandel, but Brandel's there. So Brandel, say what you want, but also please comment on, how could you imagine somebody in a virtual reality environment being able to beautifully and organically toggle between points of view, if you don't mind?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of predictably what I was going to key into. And I think that what you were saying, Jim, about the construction of this view is really interesting. How to be able to, if not fully effortlessly, then very freely be able to construct views and then be able to have sort of value conversations that center on things with reference to that view. So I feel like the construction of a view artifact is an important component of that. And then another very critical piece is the ability to tie work to having been done in that specific view, and to be able to sort of characterize the creative process of constructing those bits and pieces as they happened in that view. Again, another problem with a lot of knowledge work right now is that it is racing to the finish line of like, what is the finished work? And so it pays much more flippant and inconsistent attention to the steps that took you to that final thing. And so, as I've said in the past, like, view manipulations in Photoshop are not treated as first-class citizens, and that's a travesty, because when you zoom in on a particular thing, that's as meaningful as having used the brush tool in a given place. And so constructing the point of view for what it is that you're doing, particularly once that becomes multidimensional. In Photoshop, it's arguable that you're just panning or zooming a document around, but as soon as you're into a 3D context, then the capacity to decide where you are looking and not just happen to be looking at, but you also have a pivot point. But any higher dimension of information necessarily means that there's some sort of effective spatial manipulation on something, as well as something that could be understood as a view manipulation. And so, yeah, the construction of views, the preservation of the sort of piecemeal progress toward that view and the view in which a given piece of work was done, that they all, I believe, are sort of central to what we're talking about there.
Just really quickly. So when you paint, you don't paint with one color, everything fades, right? And if someone tries to judge things for you, that's obviously annoying. We don't trust someone else's judgment of our own position. So how about we start making a system of reading with large volumes of documents? So let's say that we ourselves say that Karl Marx Das Kapital is about freedom. Let's say someone believes that, fine, we mark that. Piketty's capitalism, whatever, we go through ourselves, whether it's a paragraph, a sentence, a book, or a system, we ourselves mark it on a wheel where we think it is over time. And then we can use that knowledge through machine learning when we come across a new document, not for just to summarize for us, but to summarize in terms of all those perspectives. Because it's not someone else's definition of authoritarianism, it is by our definition. So we could access that. Just a thought. Sorry, Fabian, that was very rude, but I just couldn't get it out of my head. Please.
So I actually tried that a little bit. It's one of the things that I guess I was a bit influenced at the quote unquote beginning of VR. There was this empathy machine repeated constantly. But I think some of it is right. I think really that can be a way. The thing it's demanding. It's like watching a documentary about, what was it? I watched a documentary just yesterday or 2 days ago about the exploitation of Africans for social media in China. And that's just, the documentary itself is fascinating, and it's also appalling. It's horrendous. So I can't watch too much of this. And I think for VR, it's a little bit like this too, but even harder because you're there, stuck in that situation. So two of the exploration, I actually put them in the chat. The very last one is very basic, but it's basically you take 360 photos during your holiday and you get back to it. But the problem is if you share those photos to a friend or a colleague, you don't know what they're looking at. So of course, that's a bit frustrating and you can't help them. So I basically put a sphere of transparency to show, okay, that person is looking in that direction. Then I can say, okay, this is that tree in that specific place in Italy, and it has this meaning and whatnot. And the second link was the same without visual, but with audio. And the idea was that person I share it with, let's say, is a colleague, and that colleague has a different, not just perspective, but training. I don't know, maybe he's trained in logistics. I don't know much about logistics. So when he looks at, I don't know, a queuing system at the airport, he's starting to think, okay, I need to use this part of the queue because I see this number of people and whatnot. And the hope there was to say, okay, I take a 360 of a situation, and then I share that 360 with somebody who is an expert, but not my expertise. And through their voice, then I can hear what's going through their mind. So basically stuck in a space with the voice of somebody else, and that try to basically explain how they think basically in that context. And you have, of course, their own perspective looking around. So it's a bit naive in the sense that you need a 360. And if you talk about, I don't know, political or ecological or economical context, you need this to be somehow visible, and it might not be. But yeah, those are a couple of attempts to try to literally share perspectives from different people.
Quite a bit to chew on there as well. The 360 perspective, particularly. Okay, I'm going to go by the order I see. Bob?
Well, I want to go back to Brandel's comments and suggest that the actual working together in groups is what I've found is among the more difficult things, and that the construction of points of view together is difficult. I start out often with the point of view, personal point of view, that we live in a mess. We live in a whole bunch of different messes. That's the standard situation, even though we try to make much of our world as stable as possible. The kinds of things such as the abortion issue that you raised, Rhoda, is a mess. And the question is, how do we then deal with these messes and with other people with these messes? Part of it, not all of it, but part of it is in the visual representation of that is text and word and visual elements together, and asking them to create these common situations. I've done a bunch of those literally with people, with leaders, with other different people, to which we call mess mapping. And I've written a book about it. The draft is on my website. This is the way we do it. We do, as somebody pointed out before, we tend to jump right away to just make a tool and we've got it. No, that isn't what you do. You take a little bit at a time with groups and learn about how you deal with messes. And we've got a lot of them, including one that I think, the other position of the point of view or a standpoint that I'm on beside messes is that we're in grave danger as a species in this century. So we need these kinds of patient, careful representations, in part because representations enable us to continue to have discussions and not start over again all the time. I'll stop there.
Yeah, just thinking. Mark, please.
That's interesting because it sort of actually neatly segues into what I was going to raise. I mean, this point of things being messy is absolutely true. And that's why I sort of put that diagram up there earlier. I mean, my point of interest is at the early stage of looking at messes and avoiding premature formalization, and this tendency we have to turn things into, binary axes. So you can't have a left without a right or this. And I think in a way that they're false or at least unhelpful constructs, because whilst they may exist as ideas, I don't think they're often a useful way of understanding the problem, because very few people are firmly on any axis, or they may be, and we also tend, in our attempt to make sense of things, we try and trim off the messy bit. So the fact that, if you think that, then you must think all these other things, which is a very specious things argumentation systems, I think, tend to get into, because it's this rush to say, are we there yet? Have we got the answer, which I think Brandon was alluding to earlier, rather than, taking time. I mean, I think I've learned as time goes by that I know more about what I don't know now than I used to. I'm far less certain about things than ever I used to be. And I find that a useful place to start from, because I'm always surprised and worried by people's sense of confidence about things that clearly they show no evidence of having a deep understanding of, although they hold the views very strongly, because it's always held up by some argumentation that never seems to quite make sense. So if we want to understand problems, I do think we need to embrace the mess, and actually we want to hold on to it in all its glory, because the quicker you structure things, the more the nuance you lose. And I think this is why a lot of argumentation mapping systems fail, because they're just trying to be too hard-edged with a subject that is just not suited to that approach.
Yep. Bob, please.
I just wanted to ask Mark what he meant by the premature constructs, because it seemed to me that where you have to start, because that's what people bring into the room, that they are, when I deal with messes that people have, I say the definition that Akoff gave to messes is a system of interrelated problems and other messes. And so we have to know how you think of the problem, and a problem is something that you're suffering from in some sort of sense, either personally or in your organization. So you have to express it. Now I don't know what premature what you were talking about, but that's where I think we have to start, and that's where I
Sure.
do start.
No, I understand, and I think so. I think what I'm saying, it doesn't run counter to what you're raising. What I mean is the rush to sort of sense that, well, you know, do we have 3 things or do we have 5 things? And the truth is, if you're asking that question, it's way too early to know. So it's using methods and tools that allow you to just hold on to that sort of looseness until you're at the point where you can begin to make a more rational judgment about where you need to put the structure in. And that doesn't run at all counter to what you're. I think the thing you raised at outset, which is, you know, well, there's this definition or that. That's all there, and they are basically, you know, there are more points on the map. But it's more this thing. The term comes from, it was a Marshall and Shipman paper from about '93, and it was talking about really the computer science space, but it was flagging up how much sort of damage was done or bad work flowed from people rushing to make decisions they didn't need to make before they needed to make them, and with the result that they were overcommitted often to a subpar outcome through shift.
Probably
Okay.
also related to don't optimize prematurely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
The phrase
basically,
premature conclusion came to my mind.
I don't think there's a fixed term in this, and I think as you know, all the inputs are just made. You know, these all point to the same thing, but it is something that I think at the same time that it's in our nature, because we want to rush ahead and get to the end.
well, it's partly that, but also we're pattern seeing creatures. So if we see a pattern at whatever stage, so I think the thing we've been going around nicely in circles a few times about how can we see things from a different perspective again and again resonates, right? So maybe we should schedule our next chat, which is in a week, on just that. How can we help see things from a different perspective, from an other perspective?
Are we, by the way, I have written in my calendar on this coming Friday, the 22nd,
Yes.
something on reading. Are we doing that?
Normally we would do every Monday and Friday, and yes, there was a talk of doing it on this Friday, but I'm afraid I have to go to a wedding. It's terrible.
Okay.
Estonian island traditional wedding. So our host said that by the time our meeting comes around, I should not be in any state to talk to anyone. So this time we're skipping a Friday.
Okay. All right. So we're canceling that and canceling the reading thing.
Yeah, the reading
putting
has
it
been
off.
No Friday.
What did you say, Peter?
So no Friday today, no Friday this week then?
That's right. But on Friday the
Got it.
29th, we have reading as our theme.
Oh,
Which should we do? Should we just say on Monday we have changing perspectives as our topic?
the 25th.
Sure. I mean, one thing to feed into it is it's interesting that we more often talk about difference than similarity. I mean, the perspective is the important part, because basically it's, you know, it's another perspective on the same thing. But it's interesting how our nature of seeing turning things basically into two opposing forces on a single axis, you know, it's so strongly written into our cultural approach to things, which probably is not helping when we try to understand thorny problems.
Yep.
In chat, by the way, I pasted an iCal. You can click on that to choose to subscribe to all the future texts calendar items if you want. So
So I have to now copy that out and put that in some other thing, and
We paste in
rather
Shari?
than email used to be really easy.
well, normally you can click on a link in the chat and it'll just open. However, for some reason, Zoom doesn't see webcal as a link. But yeah, it's basically put it in the browser and then you can subscribe and the calendar will be there for you.
Bob,
Which is an
I'm very
interesting
happy to
protocol.
put that in an email to you if it makes it easier. Then because I'm lucky, I have lots of screens, so I can easily move it around. It might be easier. I'll fire that in an email to you, and then
Thank you.
hopefully when it turns up there, it should turn up as a link.
Well, we can certainly invent a lot of other places that we can put things so that we then have to scramble around to 20 different places to do things. Excuse me for my rant.
Well, I think that's the positive and the negative. We're living in a Cambrian explosion time for digital communications medium, and I completely agree. It's very frustrating, but at least it's also kind of hopeful. It hasn't been owned by one company yet, so that's good, right?
Yeah, true.
But frustrating as heck, yes.
Email sent to Bob.
Thank you.
Well, it looked like a URL you could click on when it left at my end. So we'll see what the gods of the internet do to it in the meantime.
And this is for Monday, right?
Yes,
By now
Monday
I've
week.
forgotten what it's about.
Oh, no. This is the link that means getting an insecure connection error. Okay, well, yeah. This is for your calendar, so it automatically takes all the future meetings into the calendar.
Oh, okay. All the future meetings. All right, good. That's what I need to know. All the future meetings.
These things work so well. I'm doing one for another group that meets on alternate Saturdays and Sundays, except when the Saturday is on a Sunday or vice versa. And
Except
as
when
you
the
can imagine, the
Saturday's on a
technology copes poorly with it.
Oh, no.
That is quite funny.
Now I'm getting an unexpected error with the request on subscribe calendars, error -1.
Oh no. And of course I've filed your thing under my future text folder, Mark. But
Yeah.
I noticed that this is relevant to our discussion. What the subject line is Froda's iCal link. And the way I think of it is all the future meetings. Where?
Yeah. Yes.
When, rather.
Well, this was more that piece of paper you hand across the table. I thought I'd give you a more immediate link, but your point is absolutely well made.
Oh dear. Well, it's good to have examples that are clear to everybody, right in the middle of
Yeah.
things.
Well, that's a little gem for your future self to puzzle on.
Indeed. Any further thoughts and perspectives today?
Oh, and way back in the chat log, I dropped a link to a bibliography of all of the IBM Systems Journal issues from the start up to 2008.
Wow.
So there were two links next to each other. One's a web viewable version, and the other is a BibTeX file that you can save out and import into a reference manager.
Oh, and
Okay.
what I would like to do and can't do is have something read that from my perspective and bring out, all the important relevant points that are in all those articles, so that I don't have to read them. Who wants to read
How
them?
would you? Well, interestingly in that, and this is not as a counter at all, but the interesting challenge I see in that is how do either system know what interests you? How would you would you explain that to me?
I would say that what interests me now at this today are an interesting set of what an interesting group of people don't know and can't do.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting to me. I mean, this has been a really interesting discussion. you know, because, and I haven't tried to map it or anything, even to set it up in terms of a mess mapping kind of process, which, you know, I'm not going to do because, hey, it takes days, you know, a day or two to do these kind of things. And then to get people to link them and so forth. So that is not a, it's not, again, as other people have pointed out, it's a slow process that one maps what this group wants to, would like to do and can't do and doesn't know how to do.
Something I would try there, of course, it's naive and it's from, let's say, natural language processing mindset, is take the last text you've written, being email or whatever source, make the list of the words or a couple of like n-gram words stuck together, and then remove everything that you've already written, all the words that are already there because you know them most likely, and then find the longest either words or n-grams around, because it means those are new words for you and your concept, and then that could be a way to at least search for novelty. And if, let's say, within a certain distance, there are some of the words, let's say long words, because they're probably more complex, that you frequently wrote about during the last few days, then most likely that paragraph would be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Can I have that API, please? That sounds like a very, very useful algorithm to go in to look at things.
I'll see if I can make like a browser plugin for it, and then people can just drag and drop on any page.
So this is a really, really important issue. So I talked earlier about, imagine if you could mark different types of texts with what you consider them to be. So Fabian, now you're bringing a really useful dimension to this kind of mass reading, because I agree with Bob. I mean, it sounds stupid and childish in the best senses that we shouldn't have to read books to read them, right? Of course, at a certain point, if we find something we really want to dig into, absolutely, we should be able to, you know, there are other affordances we should have for that. But when you do read something, so if I'm just trying to understand you, Fabian, because my initial understanding is very positive, but it may be wrong. And that is, well, first of all, I need to ask you, what volume of text should be given already? It seemed like you were saying very little, but how much do you need?
Well, first of all, I need to give a word of warning. Like I just say the first thing that came to mind. It doesn't mean that it would work. And the answer to your question is as much text as possible, as long as it's properly annotated. For example, if you give me all the text you've ever written, but without any date, then that's probably not so useful, because things you wrote about 10 years ago were probably still interesting, but that's not what you're currently interested in. So I would say as much text as possible, as long as it's, yeah, at the very least dated or curated.
So Visual Meta can store the entire world, but that wouldn't be useful. But imagine if what you're talking about now is stored. So in addition to a glossary, it can also, with the user's permission, have analyzed previous users' work and extracted something of value to put in there, so that when that document in the future is looked at, the date is clear, and it also clear what the user had done before. Similarly, with the use of Scholarly or something, that may also be pulled in to do similar analysis to what you're talking about. And this may contribute to the different versions, different perspectives of reading this document or future documents. Now that Brandel is not here, Brandel, who pulled us into VR, kicking and screaming with joy, I think we should indeed, it's been brought up a few times today, machine learning, AI, whatever, we should learn what it really means, because it seems for most people it's either a panacea or it's nonsense. Of course, it's a tool, very sophisticated tool, but it's a very specific tool. It would be very good to get more of that in, and I have a feeling, Fabienne, you have more perspective on this.
Yeah, but just a quick, it's not my expertise, but I did study it formally. I think for 99% of people, if you just think statistics, it's enough. Statistics, but that instead of having a number at the end, you can have a category, for example, cat or dog or whatever. But overall, for most cases, if you replace the word machine learning and AI by statistics, I think it's productive in this, at least in your mind, in the sense that you don't get some magical goo that in the end, yeah, it's not magical. So if you think statistics, then you think you need a data set, you need some curation, you need something that's, yeah, something in, something out, some work on it. How the mathematics of how those statistics are done, yeah, it's not necessarily, I mean, it is interesting, but it's not necessarily that productive to have to know. But yes, I think thinking, yeah, it got, it's counterproductive to think magically, I think, in some situations. So yeah, the shortcut of statistics here, let's say you have a curated data set of the text you've written for a while, or that a group also has written, like, for example, the transcript here. We could imagine using the transcript of the last sessions as a way to see if a text is actually novel enough or has enough similarity. So yeah.
Because I mean, it's pattern matching, which I think is what we feel brings it close to us. Of course, the pattern matching with AI is you take all the possible outcomes and the AI gives you one, which is where probably things tend to go wrong, because, you know, it's in our nature, so, well, the computer says it's this, it must be true, whereas it might not be, and there's no particular fault in it. I mean, it's just lots of minor bad decisions all building to a, you know, a subpar outcome. So it's applying that in the wrong context is where it goes miss.
It's, yeah, it depends how you define pattern, of course. So that's interesting. So the idea of analyzing our transcripts, because we have a lot of them, it could be very, very useful. It could be, I mean, imagine something as simple as, because I don't do every single meeting anymore. At least we do the monthly ones. But imagine if we have some sort of analysis of all our, because they're all on WordPress, so it's all simple text. So that someone new to the group, they will get a page of machine learning synthesis of what we've done. That could be useful for them. It could also be useful for us to review. And we could look at the ideas of different points of view for how it's presented, so we don't pretend there's only one. A little bit like Brandel's magic carpet.
The only one fly in the ointment perhaps to that I know from working on, you know, working with you on some of the Sonics translations, you know, sort of speech to text translations, is that their Achilles heel is they use a dictionary for their matching. So what they can't, they struggle really badly with elisions, pauses, multiple repetitions, and so the trouble is, by using a dictionary-based lookup, you get a random word that is, which sort of makes sense because it's a word that you know and recognize, but actually it completely destroys or changes the meaning of something said. So of course, when you feed that in your big bucket into the machine learning, you may of course end up with something you didn't quite expect. And I don't say that is from a naysaying perspective, but it's one of the things one has to guard against.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know, but that goes back to our beginning discussion of what is in a sentence, what is in a word, what is in a concept. We will all misunderstand a large part of what we say in the deep sense. I mean, if I say Estonia to you now, you'll probably have a very different idea than I have today, which is very different from what I had last week because I hadn't been here. Just as a very superficial example. So if
but
we
it's
look
more
at
the case that if you said transport and the machine said trampoline instead, in a sentence where trampoline made sense, that's slightly different to or it's a different thing to our different sense of what a particular word or concept means. This is doing something quite unintentionally, doing something rather more destructive.
Yes, however, you just said trampoline, and now I've said trampoline, and trampolines have really nothing to do with our general discussion. So I think that kind of noise, that kind of chaos or kind of mess will be there. And I think it's okay because we're not doing exact matching for simple things if we look into this kind of thing. We are looking at more.
I wish I'd kept the examples that I changed in, because I think it was the last transcript I worked on, which was a particularly bad one in terms of the machine translation. I wish I kept the examples because it would have actually given it would have I think made the point more clearly. Because I'm not. This is a difficult thing to try and say there are problems without people saying it's all bad, which is not what I'm saying at all. But we do definitely need to hold on to the weaknesses because we are predisposed to be tripped up by the things that make life easier. Or
yeah, no, absolutely. There will be errors in transcription. There's no question about that. And that will go into the machine learning models. No, there's no question about that either. Should we try to mitigate that? Also, absolutely no question. But I think you would agree also that we shouldn't use it as an excuse not to look into this kind of thing. So it's a matter of keeping it in mind, and I think we're on the same page there. So we're kind of gone from just looking for obvious link here. Just have a quick look.
So are you all now looking at chat?
Yeah, there's a link to OSM Semantic Network that's worth clicking on.
Then I'll just expand a bit, but the idea is that there are words or tags in the end are just labels for concepts, and you can measure distance between two concepts. Again, not completely, but let's say as an average or for a certain frequency of usage. And then what they did for OSM is OpenStreetMap. It's like Google Map, but managed by a community, curated rather by a community. And then you can do a distance between different tags to see if they're related or not. So that's one example of something that seems, let's say, only qualitative, and that becomes quantitative, because we say, okay, we have a distance between those two different tags. A banana is not related to a boat, for example, usually. So we could imagine this kind of things also for any kind of document. And instead of being the taxonomy of people for OpenStreetMap, it would be within this group or even within just one person, because again, we don't have the same backgrounds, but we can probably see that also from, let's say, if we, again, are based on the transcript of how frequently one of us say the word programming or text or taxonomy, we can infer a bit from that.
As long as we don't talk about banana boats.
There's two interesting things. I mean, it's come out of that. Often you find that you can look at, for instance, the occurrence of words that come out of it, and there are two ways to see it. One is saying, gosh, it's not about what we think it is at all. The other view is just that, isn't it amazing how we talk about a subject without actually mentioning it, and we put in terms of something else, which is probably more likely the case. It's like this classic problem of trying to research a subject and then finding that no one actually ever uses the term that you use to describe the subject in the context of the subject itself, and that's a sort of commonly named problem.
It is, but I think we need to decide, or maybe even invite people in with real machine learning expertise, because I know for myself, I have been willfully ignorant for a long time, because too much of it has been press a button and work is done magically. And I think my own understanding of the tool nature of machine learning is beginning to mature a little bit. I'm sure for you it's matured a lot more. And that means better understanding the opportunities as well as the pitfalls. But to kind of ignore it, I'm sitting here on a MacBook Pro M1 chip. It can do 1 billion trillion goodies. And yet I'm using it just to look at Mark nodding. You know what I mean? So what is the feeling of moving the discussion a little bit towards machine learning in order to generate the insights and preview kind of things that Bob was asking for and perspectives James was talking about? Peter and Fabian's expressions, for the record, are inscrutable. Oh, okay. Wikipedia.
Well, I found huge amounts of the machine learning to be overly hyped. And the most troubling aspect of it is that the systems generally don't provide any explanation of how they're arriving at the conclusions they're arriving at. So just throw it at the AI, it'll give you an answer, but you have no idea why. And there's the old anecdote about the system that was distinguishing different kinds of animals. And it looked at a dog and said it was a polar bear. And they finally figured out what was happening. The system had been trained on a bunch of images, and all of the images of polar bears were polar bears walking across snow, and the dog in question was walking on a white carpet. So all the system had really learned was floor white equals polar bear, floor any other color equals dog.
But that's how humans learn too, of course. And that's how we make mistakes. I mean, Black Swan is an amazing example of that. But one great thing, I remember sitting with a Russian, of all people, scientist, wonderful guy in Croatia many years ago, and talking about the idea of going through a lot of student papers where it was known that the students were suffering from depression, putting that into a model, and then running that model against new student papers to help a teacher highlight maybe a student is depressed but not telling anyone. So there are specific use cases that may or may not be useful. And in a case like that, and I was a teacher at the time, I would love to have this because you have responsibility for your students, right? It's simply to say to the student, hey, are you okay? It's not a black and white thing. So maybe if we have it within the same parameters of looking at this as being indicative or system suggests rather than system says.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't
be a very strong side.
I wouldn't start with sentiment analysis of anywhere in the machine learning pool. It's one of the more flawed parts. It's just in the same way that I mean, a big problem is it's a bit like we want to have self-driving cars. One of the more difficult automation problems in the way that we want something like machine learning to understand the nuance and the structure of our spoken, often both our spoken and our written language, where there's there are sort of levels within it that we parse quite naturally as humans, but which a mechanical system struggles with, because until it has a large enough corpus, it struggles even with a large corpus. So English is better, say, than Croatian for that very reason. But it's perhaps, I mean, it's not it's doing anything wrong. It's just the fault is ours as a human. At the end of it is we just place too much faith in it because we want it to solve a problem we want solved. And the fact it gives us a solution, we too readily assume that it's the correct solution because that's what we wanted. And that's what I just faced.
So what I did while you were talking there, Mark, was I texted Bruce Horn. I said, Bruce, could you come to one of our Monday, Friday meetings and talk about machine learnings for text analysis? Bruce, as some of you know, he wrote the first Finder for the first Mac, and he's now back at Apple, basically trying to improve Siri. So he's worked at a lot of different machine learning, AI, whatever the fashionable name was over the years. And I think he would be able to give us a very reasonable, it actually does this kind of a presentation, and may even give us specific pointers to how to deal with what we're talking about.
If you want something not too challenging, I really quite enjoyed that, written by someone who I think she's got a doctorate in sort of machine learning. The odd title comes from, she basically was trying to make a program that would make chat up lines, and this is one of the more bizarre ones that came out. But it is talking about, instead of trying to treat you like a programmer and talk about, you know, what all this is about, is explaining, you know, some of the real challenges and some of the limitations, and not from an opinionated standpoint of good or bad, but just effectively trying to inform. So as I say, I'll put a link. I'll drop a link in the. It's called "You Look Like a Thing and I Love You."
Yeah, that's good. That's
by
good. By the way,
Janelle Shane, published by Wildfire.
Yeah, please put that in the chat. By the way, Fabian, your link to GitHub is completely useless for someone like me.
Probably not, but you need definitely more than 10 seconds.
Okay, Bruce says he could, but he's all being very humble and stuff. So we'll figure out something.
I just put it as it happens. It's obviously not around enough. The book has a page on Wikipedia, so that should be suitably sort of neutral enough for anybody. Because I was trying to avoid shop links to well-known bookshops online. There are a couple of others. I mean, Meredith Broussard's one I thought was also quite good. And
so Bruce is saying he would like an email about exactly what we want him to cover. How about everybody who wants to write a sentence in the chat or an email to me for what you would like him to cover, and I'll send it on. Or is it very general? What do we want?
Maybe sending him the little dreams shared or at the beginning of this session, because some were related to it. Maybe that could give a little bit of context.
Well,
okay. Yeah, I can give him a summary.
We could, if there's a summary list of what we can't do and don't know from this session, we could ask him, what is machine learning? What can machine learning contribute to any of these questions or topics or can't do's?
It's a text message I sent today. Actually, I'm going to put it in the chat and read it. This is to my friend Kevin in California. It says, I am by the ports in Tallinn in Estonia, taking pictures of all ships, wish you were here. That was completely dictated through Siri via my watch. It understood ports and Tallinn, got that right. Estonia got that right. These are not everyday words. So I'm wondering what level of context, considering Apple is all about privacy, it has access to. It was hugely impressive. So I'm just putting it in there as a little bit of machine learning to at least get the input right. Can be just amazing these days.
It knew you were in Estonia, didn't it?
I'm not sure. It may have known that, or it may have looked at my previous text messages where I've been using that text, Estonia. So yeah, I think I'll just send an email to or a message to Bruce just saying what level of analysis is rigorous and available for text. Because and Fabian, because of your deeper knowledge, if you'd like to add a paragraph or whatever to some suggested aspects, that would be very, very useful.
I would repeat again what my recommendation was that we list at least 8 or 10 of the topics of what we don't know and can't do, and what relevance, you know, what can machine learning help us with there. I'm just tying it to our the conversation that we started out with this morning.
I'm just looking at that list again. Okay.
Though in that sense, we might want to push the text element back to the fore, because one of the starting points to all this is you know, a feeling that you know, text was being ignored. I mean, I know machine learning consumes vast amounts of textual information, but I think that's a different, slightly different thing. It's all just ones and zeros at the point of ingestion.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting discussion today. We kind of started talking about what we don't know about connections. And we got a good list of that. I'll put it up somewhere in the web, accessible for us. And then we decided that maybe it's time to see where machine learning is actually useful rather than overblown or unreliable to help us with large volumes of text. Considering that in Photoshop, you can click a button and it'll select the foreground and the sky and that kind of stuff for you now, that's normal. What we're talking about isn't really asking that much, is it?
Well, I mean, something that's pertinent there is you know, one thing that I think is generally accepted, that AI/ML, the one area where it's made really good traction is in image recognition. And I don't think anyone sort of really doubts that. And that's, you know, and is being put to good use today. I mean, you know, like everything else around this, around the sort of leading edges, there will be things that aren't quite right yet. But in that field, it's streets ahead of where it is in terms of actually understanding our texts, which is a whole different world to the fact that you can feed an idea into GPT-3 and it'll spit out an article that looks as though it's, you know, written by a human. But that's a bit of a, you know, magic trick, really.
Yeah, that's a good point. Fabian, I'm just thinking about the OSM semantic network. Do you know of any libraries that I can use in Author to help do the layouts in the map? Because I'm having problems finding them because I don't know fully what to search for.
You mean the visualization?
Yeah.
Like D3 or like there are a lot of visualization, depends a bit where you want to host it. But I think you've done some graph visualization before, so you could probably reuse that.
No, I haven't. It's all manual. It's all move this here, move that there. But it would be hosted in Author, so the idea is that when you type when you add a concept, it puts it not just random on the screen, but it puts it in a relation depending on the definitions you have, also weighed by the OSM type thing. And then you should be able to move it yourself later, fine, but you should also be able to click a button saying recalculate.
You need Klaus's system. It sounds like you are describing Mother, I think.
Yeah, it absolutely relates to that. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Just again, something to bear in mind if looking at sort of layout systems is there is a heavy skew towards things that basically do force-directed graphs, which are, it's how they make all those fancy-looking social network type graphs. So the area of this has been really heavily trampled because of the sort of the popularity of social networks as a thing at the moment. Means an awful lot has gone into that, and not so much into necessarily into other forms of layout that actually might be more pertinent to what you're trying to do.
Yeah,
it's frustrating, but that's just the way it is.
No, that exactly. So we're now on the hour. Fabian, if you have any thoughts, if you want to Twitter or email them, that would be good if something comes to mind, but absolutely no worries. Other than that, we are looking to try to figure out using machine learning to help us see other perspectives. That's part of what we're looking at, right? And you're all going to wish me luck in uploading today's call online. I'll probably do it in 2 sections because doing edits, it's really weird. The Zoom compression is fantastic. So once I go to Final Cut and come back out, the files are many times bigger. So we'll see. So tomorrow we're going shooting. That's the culture thing we're doing here. Yeah, well, you never know when Putin decides to come this way. So better be ready. Better polish my old skills. Well, we do have half the British Army here. But thanks for today, guys. It was inspiring. I'm really grateful for the community, and I look forward to seeing you in a week.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye,
Bye,
folks. Take
guys.
care.
Bye.